Mitt Romney won handily in Arizona, as expected, but he kind of squeaked by in his home state of Michigan, winning by about 3 percentage points above Rick Santorum. Now, Neil, you're in Washington. I know this was a win, but was it enough of a win to, for once and for all, establish Romney as the presumptive, front runner?
No, there's a lot of suspense left in this race. I was just looking at the kind of scale, the stairway of delegates needed to get to the nomination, and he's on about step 3. It's really amazing. He's about 13% of the way to the nomination in terms of the delegates needed. And, he didn't lose in Michigan. He won it by a narrow margin. It's a big escape for him, and it's an important one. But there's a lot to be determined still going forward about what his appeal is really going to be elsewhere in the Midwest and in other parts of the country that really decide, who wins the general election. And, now, of course, it's all eyes on next Tuesday, Super Tuesday, particularly all eyes on Ohio. And I think this win in Michigan will help him a lot in Ohio. But at the moment, he's lagging Rick Santorum by a fair bit in the polls in Ohio. So that's going to be the big test.
We're going to listen quickly to Mitt Romney celebrating his win last night in Michigan.
And in this room are the people who knocked on the doors and made the calls and went to the polls, and it made an enormous difference. We didn't win by a lot, but we won by enough, and that's all that counts.
And Neil, I mean, that quote is really interesting to me. We didn't, we won by enough, and that's what counts. But I wonder if it does, because for one, I mean, Romney outspent Santorum's campaign by about 2-1 in Michigan. It's his home state. His father was a popular governor there. To win by just 3 percentage points doesn't seem like enough.
It all depends on where you start the narrative. A month ago, Michigan was a gimme. It was just like you said, his home territory. He was going to win it. It was never really going to be overtly contested. Then it became very tight race. He had to outspend Rick Santorum by more than 2-1. A lot of negative ads. Once again, he had to kind of batter down his opponent in order to win. The one thing that was interesting in Arizona, it was really the first time in any of the races that he's won that he got a kind of freebie. Very little money was spent there. He won that on a coast. So that's a good sign for him in a way, but it remains the case that where there is a battle, he has to fight in sort of outsized ways in order to win these races, when as the presumptive frontrunner, he looks at himself that way. It's just a lot more work than you would think it should take at this stage.
And we have there on the screen the states that are going to be voting on Tuesday's Super Tuesday.
Neil, let me ask you about the possibility that Santorum could ever get the Republican establishment behind him. I mean, we have a situation here where Romney is the presumptive candidate, and the reality is no matter how well Santorum does, I mean, in the best case, he has a very divided and split Republican Party by the time he gets to convention. That's the best case for Rick Santorum. Why doesn't he just bow out? Why doesn't he just give it to Romney, take his blessings, push for a little social conservatism, and call it a day?
Because this is the race of his life. He's loving it. He's now being considered seriously as a potential presidential nominee. That's the last thing he wants to do is step off the stage. I mean, people like Rick Santorum feed off these sort of things. So I think that's the last thing from his mind. And the interesting thing that's so different now from previous contests is that, Santorum is raising kind of okay money himself, but what's keeping him alive and what's keeping Newt Gingrich alive is the fact that if you've got a big sugar daddy or one or two of them pouring money into your super PACs, they can back you up and keep you going by advertising on your behalf. And that's really, really changed the dynamic of the race this year.
And what's going to be interesting looking forward, I mean, beyond Super Tuesday, Santorum and Romney are kind of trying to out-conservative each other, if you will, prove kind of who's the true conservative. But then once the nominee is decided, that person's going to have to swing back to the middle, right, to attract a broader audience. So they kind of have to be careful about what they're saying in the coming months.
But the strange thing is, I'm curious to get Neil's take. Santorum is running as a populist social conservative, and that should alienate a huge section of both independents and moderate Republicans. And I cannot understand why Santorum believes, or really anybody believes, any of these polls that show that he's actually electable against Barack Obama.
Last word, Neil King.
You know what's really funny is that even in the national polls where he'll be leading by a fair margin, he has been for the last week or so, or a couple of weeks, in those same polls, the same people will be asked, well, who's best to beat Obama? And Romney leads in those by even wider margins. So even the same people that are liking Rick Santorum are conceding that he's not the best person to go up against Obama. And that's just this weird, fight within the soul of the Republican Party at the moment. And, we'll see how it plays out. But the reality, I think, is that in the end, Romney will probably be the nominee, and there'll be a lot of tepid support for him, and people are going to have to go a long ways to start loving him if they ever will.